The scent of polished wood and incense was heavy in the air as I stood in the cathedral's back row. The choir's voices rose above the hushed crowd, and people whispered about legacy, about what would happen next, but my name was not whispered. Not once. This was the funeral of Richard Howard, founder, CEO, visionary, and to me the only person in that company who had ever looked past appearances in politics. He had been more than just a boss. He was a mentor, a protector. Late one night over coffee he had told me quietly, "Amy, you see what others miss. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Now he was gone, lowered into the ground with lilies on his casket. In the front row sat his son Daniel, surrounded by board members dressed in black. Their faces were masks of grief, carefully arranged for appearances, but I could see the calculation behind their eyes. To them, Richard's death was more than a tragedy. It was an opening. Everyone assumed Daniel would inherit control. His jaw was set as if he were already wearing his father's crown. Whispers rippled through the cathedral. The transition will be smooth. The company will stay in the family. No one questioned it. No one looked at me. In silence, I kept my eyes down, my hands folded. Because what they didn't know, what I couldn't reveal, not yet, was that Richard's final decision had changed everything. The memory of that night came back to me with brutal clarity. A week before his heart failed, he had called me into his office. The lights were dim, his voice weaker than usual but steady. He slid a sealed envelope across the oak desk. "Amy," he said, "there will be chaos when I'm gone. You've seen how they circle. That's why I'm leaving this to you." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was his notarized will. My name stared back at me in black ink. Richard had not left control to his son. He had named me Amy Clark, the majority heir. I looked at him, stunned. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because," he said, his eyes burning even in his frailty, "you'll protect what I built. They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage." Now, standing at the back of his funeral, I heard his words again. They echoed through the cathedral louder than the organ. The board shifted in their seats, already whispering, already planning. Let them. The week that followed blurred into polite condolences and hushed conversations in glass offices. I was suddenly excluded. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were moved without me. By Friday afternoon, I was summoned to the executive conference room. The air inside smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. The board sat in a neat row, Daniel at the head of the table, his mouth curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Amy," the chairman began, his voice dipped in false sympathy, "we've reviewed operations in light of recent changes. Unfortunately, we've decided your role has been made redundant. Effective immediately." The words landed like stones. Once they would have broken me. Years ago I might have begged, argued, pleaded to stay, but now all I felt was a strange calm. I smiled just slightly. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity." For a moment silence hung in the room. They hadn't expected composure. They had expected tears, outrage, humiliation. Instead I stood, gathered my belongings and walked toward the door. "Security will escort you out," one of them said quickly, as though afraid I might lash out. In the elevator my reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, set jaw, lips curved into the faintest of smiles. They think I'm finished. How fun Monday would be. That night, in my small apartment, I placed the cardboard box of personal belongings on the floor. A photo of my mother. A pen I'd kept since my first day. A mug with a chipped handle. None of it mattered. The real inheritance, the one no one suspected, was locked safely in my desk drawer. The will, Richard's final signature, his trust in me, his belief that I could hold steady where others would falter. As I sat alone in the quiet, grief surged through me. Not for the job, not for the titles they stripped away, but for Richard himself. He had seen me when no one else did. When promotions passed me over. When my ideas were stolen. When I was told to smile more if I wanted to get ahead. Richard saw me. And now he had given me the one thing they could never take back. Control. I poured a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, the board was celebrating my departure, congratulating themselves on saving money, already dividing up what they thought was theirs. Let them laugh. Let them believe they'd erased me. Because by Monday morning, the truth would hit them like a storm. The offices they claimed as theirs were already mine. And this was only the beginning. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a quiet storm waiting to break. For the first time in years, I didn't have to set an alarm for Monday morning. Didn't have to iron a blouse. Didn't have to paste on a polite smile in the elevator. I should have felt lost. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. Still, the silence in my apartment was heavy. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues. Some polite, some not so polite. Amy, I'm so sorry. I heard they let you go. The board toasted to you being dead weight at the club last night. Daniel's bragging about streamlining operations. I read them all slowly, letting the words sink in. Dead weight. Streamlining. Celebrating. They had no idea. Not yet. On Saturday morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and pulled Richard's will from the drawer. The document was heavy in my hands, the notarized seal catching the light. I traced my name on the page. The letter still unreal. He hadn't left it to Daniel. He hadn't left it to the board. He'd left it to me. A voice echoed in my head. Richard's voice, soft but certain. They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage. Let them move first, then strike. That became my mantra. By midday, the arrogance of the board was already spilling into the open. Nell, one of the few colleagues I trusted, sent me a message. They're planning to sell off one of the smaller divisions. Bryce is already talking about taking over operations. Perfect. The more reckless they became, the easier it would be to show investors the truth. But doubt crept in that evening as I sat in my quiet living room. Could I really face them? Men twice my age, polished in politics and manipulation. All convinced I was nothing but a disposable pawn? I thought about the times I had been talked over in meetings, when my ideas were credited to someone else, when I stayed late fixing problems others caused only to watch them promoted. The anger steadied me. Richard hadn't chosen me out of pity. He had chosen me because he knew I had the patience to wait and the foresight to plan. Saturday night my phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment I answered. Amy, a familiar voice said, smug and drawn out. It was Bryce, one of the oldest board members. I heard about your situation. Tough break. But look, if you're looking for opportunities, I can put in a word elsewhere. We have to look out for each other, right? I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I kept my tone flat. That's generous of you. He chuckled. Anyway, exciting times ahead. You know, fresh leadership, bold moves. Maybe I'll even be running things soon. Congratulations, Bryce, I said softly. I'm sure it'll be memorable. When I hung up, I couldn't stop smiling. He had no idea that by Monday, his words would come back to haunt him. On Sunday morning, I took a different step. I met with Emily Chan, the lawyer Richard had insisted I bring into confidence months ago. Sharp eyes, calm demeanor, the kind of professional who could dismantle a contract line by line. She reviewed the will again carefully, running her finger along the notarized seal. It's airtight, she said, her voice steady. They can try to challenge it, but with this documentation, the notary, the witnesses, the physician's statement confirming Richard was of sound mind, they won't get far. I exhaled, tension I hadn't realized I was carrying slipping from my shoulders. Patience, Emily said, echoing Richard's words. Don't rush. Let them make mistakes. When you strike, make it final. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, looking out at the city lights across town. I imagined the board laughing over their glasses of whiskey, congratulating each other for cutting costs, for finally putting me in my place. They thought Monday would be their victory lap. Instead, Monday would be the day they learned who truly held control. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered Richard's words into the night. They'll underestimate you. That's your advantage. And they already had. By the time I went to bed, the doubt had faded. The fear had quieted. All that was left was the steady hum of anticipation. Tomorrow I wouldn't walk into that building as an employee. I would walk in as the owner. And that thought carried me through the night. Monday morning came earlier than I expected. I woke before the alarm. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the city outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to rush. No hurried coffee, no checking emails before the elevator ride, no forced smiles in the lobby. Today was different. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on my balcony, watching the streets below fill with people hurrying to jobs they hated. Across town, the board was likely already gathered in the executive conference room, congratulating themselves on streamlining operations. They thought I'd disappear quietly into unemployment, maybe beg for a reference, maybe fade into obscurity. Instead, I held something they couldn't even imagine: control. By 8:30 a.m., I was dressed in a navy suit. Understated, sharp, nothing flashy. I needed to look like what I was: calm, prepared, inevitable. I slipped Richard's notarized will into my briefcase alongside Emily Chen's cover letter, citing my legal rights as majority heir. When I arrived at the building, security hesitated. After all, I'd been terminated. But when I handed them the sealed envelope with Emily's letterhead, their faces changed instantly. Within minutes, I was being escorted upstairs, not as an employee, but as something none of them had grasped yet. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, a wall of glass overlooking the skyline. The men around the table looked up in surprise as I entered. "What is she doing here?" Bryce muttered, his brow furrowing. I set my briefcase down gently, letting the silence stretch. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said evenly. "I believe I have every right to be here." The chairman cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "Amy, this meeting is for board members only. As you know, your employment was terminated last week." Without a word, I slid the folder across the table. "Then you'll want to read this." Confusion flickered across his face as he opened it. His eyes scanned the notarized signatures, the legal seals, Richard's handwriting. His expression shifted from disbelief to something close to panic. The others leaned in, murmuring, their voices sharp whispers as they flipped through the pages. This can't be real," the chairman finally stammered. "It's very real," I replied calmly. 3 days before his death, Richard Howaren signed over his majority stake to me. That makes me the controlling shareholder of this company." The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then Bryce slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. You expect us to believe he'd hand control to you of all people?" I met his glare without flinching. "Believe whatever you want. The paperwork is valid, witnessed, notarized, and already filed. I've spoken with my attorney. As of this moment, your authority is subject to my approval." The room erupted. Half the board began whispering frantically, while others rifled through the documents as if hoping to find a mistake. Bryce's voice cut through the noise, harsh and bitter. "She's bluffing. She has no experience, no standing. Richard would never trust her with this." "Funny," I said softly, leaning forward. "Because he did. And unlike you, Bryce, he valued results over politics." His face reddened. "You think you can just walk in here and take over?" "I don't think," I answered, my voice steady. "I know." The chairman raised a hand, trying to regain control. "Even if this arrangement is valid, surely you understand the challenges: investors, clients, employees. This revelation could destabilize everything." I let the words hang for a beat before replying. "Destabilize or restore confidence? Because let's be clear, without Richard, your house of cards was already collapsing. Declining margins, restless investors, deals slipping away. You've been painting over cracks while the foundation rotted. Richard knew it. That's why he chose me." The truth of my words silenced them more than the documents had. They knew I was right. Numbers didn't lie. Just then my phone buzzed on the table. I let it ring deliberately, leaving the screen face up. The name flashing across it was one they all recognized: Anderson Holdings, our largest institutional investor. The timing couldn't have been better. "Excuse me," I said, answering the call in full view of the board. "Yes, this is Amy Clark. Of course, I'll meet with you this afternoon. We'll discuss the company's future." I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. "They already know," I said quietly. "And they're ready to talk." The look on Bryce's face was priceless, a mix of shock and fear. The first cracks in his arrogance finally showing. For the next hour, the board scrambled, questioning the legality, arguing technicalities, trying to delay the inevitable. I answered each point calmly, citing the legal validations Emily had prepared. They could fight, they could stall, but they couldn't undo the fact: I was the majority shareholder. Finally I stood, gathering my papers. "Gentlemen, I'll give you the rest of the day to adjust to the new reality. Tomorrow morning we'll reconvene to discuss restructuring. Properly this time. Without waiting for a response, I left the boardroom. Outside, assistants and staff lined the hallway, pretending not to eavesdrop. Their eyes followed me as I walked past. I offered a small, calm smile. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of power settle into place. Not revenge, not yet. Something larger. Richard's words echoed in my mind. They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage. And they had spectacularly. By noon the emails began. First from the company secretary, then from outside counsel. Subject lines in all caps, phrases in bold. Contest, capacity, temporary restraining order. They were going to argue Richard hadn't been of sound mind when he signed the will. I'd expected it. Emily had too. Before I could call her, my phone vibrated again. No. They're telling staff you forged documents. Bryce said you preyed on a dying man. HR asked IT to pull your emails. I stopped walking, staring at the message until my reflection in the screen looked like someone else. Are they wiping records? I typed back. Head of InfoSec refused without a board resolution. He asked for GC sign-off. They don't have it. Small spine, big moment. I exhaled. Emily picked up on the first ring. They'll go after capacity, she said without hello. We prepared for this. You have the notary, the 2 witnesses, and the physician's letter from the same week. I'm filing for a status quo order. No asset sales, no personnel changes, no material contracts until ownership is resolved. Delaware Chancery? I asked. Exactly. Judges there like preserving the current state. Focus on investors. I'll handle the fire hose. The elevator in Anderson Holdings lobby smelled faintly of metal and lemon. I arrived at 2 p.m. sharp. The receptionist's smile was professional. The conference room was glass and quiet, the skyline a steel line behind it. Victoria Hale, early 50s, composed, eyes that missed nothing, shook my hand and sat. We want stability, Miss Clark, not theater. Why should we support you? I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about numbers. Cash burn is up 9% year over year. Realized revenue is flat. Client churn ticked from 6 to 8.5. The board's response has been cosmetic. Headcount optics, press releases, nothing operational. My 90-day plan is simple. Freeze non-essential spend, audit every auto-renew contract, move bonuses from bookings to gross margin, and set retention triage for the top 50 clients with named owners and operations. She asked about an interim COO with P&L discipline. I gave her 2 names Richard had vetted. She didn't blink. I outlined a governance refresh. 3 seats by shareholder written consent. Install an independent audit chair in 30 days. Publish segment-level disclosure on our quarterly calls. And adopt a binding say-on-pay policy. I paused. If the court grants status quo and the will stands, I'll execute on day 1. Victoria folded her hands. Deliver the consent, name the interim COO, and brief us twice weekly. If the court holds the line, you'll have a support letter by morning. The breath I'd been holding finally left. Thank you. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. Nell again, a photo of a white envelope taped to the boardroom door. Service of shareholder written consent stamped in blue beneath it. Then a second photo of Bryce Mitsnarl, lips thin, eyes hard. They're rattled, she wrote. InfoSec just locked the email purge. GC finally intervened. Back at home, an email from Emily was waiting. A scanned letter on hospital letterhead. Signed by Richard's physician. Patient is of sound mind and fully oriented. Cleared to execute legal decisions. We had never wanted to use it. Now it was a shield. At 6:07 p.m., a push alert hit my phone. Industry ledger exclusive. Fired VP claims majority inheritance. Board shocked. A senior source called me opportunistic and unstable. The word stung once, then the burn cooled into focus. I forwarded the article to Victoria with a single line. We will not litigate in the press. Her reply came fast. Good answer. Emily and I met at her office at 7. She slid a 3-page document across the table. Shareholder written consent, she said. Remove directors A, B, and C. Appoint independent replacements. Ratify interim operating authority pending court confirmation. Process servers go at 8:15. I read every line, then signed. Careful and slow. Felt like writing on glass. Precise, irreversible. They'll try an emergency Toro, Emily said, capping her pen. We'll be in front of a vice-chancellor at 10 a.m. I've asked for a status quo order and an instruction that no corporate action occurs without your written consent. Will we get it? We have clean facts. Judges like clean facts. On my way out, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Bryce's voice followed, a mix of threat and faux concern. Amy, be reasonable. This will ruin you. Come in tomorrow and we'll find you a soft landing. I forwarded it to Emily with one word. Preserve. The city had shifted into its night rhythm by the time I reached our building. Through the glass of our offices I could see silhouettes moving in the boardroom, hands cutting the air like blades. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late fixing someone else's mess, while those same silhouettes toasted each other across town. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking. At 9:18 p.m. Nell texted, staff rumor mill is wild. Daniel told someone you stole the company. People who ignored you for years are suddenly asking if you're hiring. I typed back, tell them to get sleep. Tomorrow is paperwork, not fireworks. It sounded like something Richard would say. I hoped he'd approve. Near midnight I opened Richard's old notebook. He'd kept short arrows between names. Shorthand so compact it looked like code. Next to Bryce. Short horizon, corners with timelines. Next to the chairman. Hates public embarrassment. Lean on process. Next to my name, one line, steady hands. I placed the notebook beside my phone and stared at the ceiling until my heartbeat slowed to something steady, something usable. Power wasn't a roar. It was a pulse you learned to keep. At 7:02 the next morning, Emily texted. Hearing confirmed. 10 a.m. Court of Chancery. Dress plain. Speak once. Let me carry the water. I answered with a thumbs up and a single word. Ready. By 8:15 process servers had confirmed delivery. By 8:40, Anderson's draft support letter hit my inbox. Conditional on status quo. At 9:03, the company secretary emailed a last-ditch request to delay any meeting pending clarity. I replied with one sentence Emily had written for me. All parties are bound to maintain the status quo pending court instruction. In the mirror, I adjusted the collar of a black jacket I'd worn to half a dozen budget meetings that never mattered. Today it did. I wasn't walking into a fight to scream. I was walking in to hold a line. They had moved first. Now it was my turn to make it final. The courthouse steps were slick with rain that morning, the air damp and heavy. Inside, the corridors hummed with low voices and the shuffle of shoes against marble. At exactly 10 a.m., we filed into the Chancery courtroom. Emily walked ahead of me, her posture steady, every move precise. I kept my hands folded, remembering her advice. Speak once, let me carry the water. Across the aisle sat the board's attorneys, faces drawn tight, papers spread across the table like shields. Bryce was there too, jaw clenched, whispering furiously to Daniel. They looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of panic had already begun to bend their shoulders. The hearing itself lasted barely 20 minutes. The board argued Richard hadn't been of sound mind when he signed the will, that I had manipulated him, that this transfer would destabilize the company. Emily rose with calm precision, citing the notarization, the physician's attestation, and 2 independent witness statements. She reminded the court that Delaware law favored preserving the status quo during disputes. The vice-chancellor leaned back, steepling his fingers. Until this matter is fully resolved, no material changes will occur without Ms. Clark's written consent. Status quo order granted. His gavel came down softly, but in that moment it sounded like thunder. The board's last illusion of control shattered in a single sentence. Bryce's face went red. Daniel muttered something I couldn't hear. Emily gathered her papers without expression, but as we stepped out into the rain, she gave me the smallest nod. Clean win. Now go lead. At 11 o'clock sharp, I reconvened the board. This time I didn't sit at the side. I sat at the head of the table. 3 new independent directors joined quietly, their presence alone enough to shift the atmosphere. The old guard glared, their outrage muted by the court order resting in my briefcase. I spoke plainly. The company belongs to its clients, its employees, and its shareholders, not to personal egos. That ends today. I turned to Bryce. Your resignation is effective immediately. Compensation frozen pending audit. His mouth opened then closed again. Daniel looked at him waiting for defiance but none came. The chairman shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. For the first time in years the room was silent, not because I had been talked over but because they were forced to listen. By mid-afternoon, Anderson Holdings issued a statement of conditional support. Other investors followed. Staff received a company-wide email. Effective immediately, Amy Clark assumes authority as majority shareholder and interim chair. My inbox exploded with messages, some congratulatory, some shocked, some scrambling to realign themselves. Nell's text made me laugh quietly. Never seen so many people suddenly remember your name. Yet, as the day wore on and the adrenaline ebbed, I found myself sitting alone in my new office. Richard's old office, overlooking the city skyline. On the desk was a framed photo of him smiling at a company picnic years ago. I touched the frame lightly, my throat tightening. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not really. It was weight, responsibility. Richard hadn't given me 51% to settle scores. He had done it because he believed I would protect what he built from being hollowed out by greed. I whispered into the quiet. I hope I did it right. The truth was, revenge had never been the goal. Justice was. And justice doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like patience, paperwork, and a steady hand at the table. As dusk settled, I walked the quiet halls of the building, remembering the years I had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had fired me to erase me. And in doing so, they handed me the one thing they could never take back. Control. I paused by the glass wall outside the boardroom, now empty, the city lights flickering beyond. Power wasn't loud. It wasn't fists on tables or shouting in corridors. It was a pulse, steady and quiet, waiting for the right moment to break into thunder. I locked the office door behind me that evening, the weight of the keys solid in my hand. Tomorrow would bring audits, investor calls, difficult conversations and hard work. But for the first time it would be on my terms. And that, more than anything, was the real victory.